This episode may contain content of a graphic nature, including descriptions of physical and sexual violence against adults, children, and animals. Listener discretion is advised. Hi everyone, I'm Talia.
And I'm Tanya.
And together we are Crimes and Consequences, a true crime podcast.
Welcome back, everyone, to another episode of Crimes and Consequences. I'm Tanya, and this is my lovely co-host, Talia.
Hello.
We are a couple lawyers who also enjoy talking about true crime.
And swearing.
Yes.
And eating.
Yes, those are our
We have
top
lots
three.
of hobbies.
This is a story that I think a lot of people may know. It was pretty popular in the news, I'd say probably in the 90s. But anyway, before I get into it.
I don't even know what it is.
I know. You're going to know it, though. I know you
Okay.
will. Before we get into it, I'd just like to remind everyone to hit the subscribe or follow button on whatever app you're listening to if you're on YouTube. And we'd like to thank True Crime Daily for hosting us.
Thank you.
So on October 31st,
you're getting right into it.
I am. No
Right
chit
into
chat. No, we don't have, ain't nobody got time for that.
Don't get a time.
On October 31st, 1975, around 12:15 in the afternoon, a girl named Sheila McGuire, who was a teenager living in the exclusive Belle Haven community in Greenwich, Connecticut,
Okay.
was walking from her house to her friend Martha Moxley's to invite her to go downtown that day.
Oh, I know this
See,
case.
I told you you'd know
But
it.
I don't know all the details.
I know, I forgot all the details. So to get to her friend's house, she cut through a wooded section of their backyards. And as she's, going along, she spots underneath the low-hanging branches of a pine tree what looked like a sleeping bag lying on top of a foam mattress. As she continued to walk closer, she was able to see that it was the partially clothed body of her friend Martha, who was somewhat hidden by the branches of the tree. And so Sheila ran to the Moxley house and rang the doorbell.
This ended up being a cold case, right? For a while.
For a while. Dorothy Moxley, who was Martha's mom, was there with several of her friends who were gathered to show support because she'd been worried when Martha hadn't returned home the night before. And she'd been reaching out to Martha's friends for hours up to that point, looking for Martha. And the night previous was Devil's Night. At least that's what we call it here.
October 30th?
October 30th.
Yeah, in Detroit, Devil's Night is a big night. They burn
is.
down all the abandoned houses, but not all of them.
Not anymore, I don't
There's
think.
No,
No, I don't think they do that
there's
anymore.
too many abandoned houses.
Yeah. But, kids go out and like toilet paper the trees
Oh,
and
Yeah,
soap the
I'm
windows.
sure I did some of that
and-
stupid shit.
Yeah,
I'm no doubt.
Exactly.
Devil's Night.
In fact, Martha had just called her husband, David, who's Martha's dad. He was out of town for work, and she left him a message that Martha was missing and to come home as soon as possible. When Sheila came to her door, she told Dorothy that she'd found Martha, and it didn't look like she was okay. Martha was face down. Her head was covered with dried blood. Her blue jeans and underwear were pulled down to below her knees.
I didn't know that.
Yeah, and her body was ice cold. Upon hearing this, Dorothy collapsed into a chair in the living room. John Moxley, who was Martha's older brother, had been at football practice when Martha was found. The night before, he'd been out with other neighborhood teens going to parties. It's like I said,
Devil's Night.
Devil's Night. I don't know what they call it in Connecticut, but
Probably the same thing.
when John got home, and this was around midnight.
So this is her brother.
Yeah, this is her brother. Martha wasn't there, obviously, and Dorothy had asked him to go around the neighborhood and search for his sister. While he was getting dressed in the locker room after practice, his coach, and this is now the next day, like after Martha's found, his coach pulled him aside, telling him something happened at home, and he didn't give him any further details, so John ran out the door and just drove home like a bat out of hell.
Freaking out, I'm sure.
When he arrived, he saw his house surrounded by police cars. There were, the officers, the media trucks were already there with a bunch of reporters. There was emergency personnel, curious neighbors.
Because this is a rich neighborhood.
Yeah, this is a rich neighborhood. And there was other onlookers. So he left his truck at the end of the driveway and he ran up to the house. Martha had been hit in the head with a golf club several times. Her head and face were so bloody that first responders said they didn't realize she'd been had blonde hair.
Wow.
That's how bad it was.
Horrible.
The murderer had hit Martha with such force that her skull had cracked and the golf club had broken.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. And then,
that's got to be hard to break a golf club.
I know, right? And then the remainder of the club was used to stab her.
Oh, I didn't know that.
Yeah.
What? Stab her where?
It was through her neck.
Oh.
And it had threaded a lock of her hair through the skin, like when she was like hit with it, like her, through her muscle and her skin like a needle, like that's the club impaled her and her hair went into the wound.
The poor baby.
Yeah, I
What
know.
the fuck is that?
I know. And she's 15. I don't know if I mentioned it. She's only 15.
Just a baby.
It's believed that the stab wound is what killed her.
Okay.
Okay. So it wasn't necessarily the blows to the head.
Even though it crushed her skull.
Yeah, even though it crushed her skull.
Oh, wow.
The police believe that Martha had been attacked from behind when she was first hit in the head. After she'd been beaten, the killer dragged her body 70 feet into her backyard and placed her underneath the pine tree.
So she was found where she wasn't killed.
Correct. Yes. Yeah, she wasn't killed underneath that pine tree.
Okay.
She was placed there by the killer.
Where was she killed?
It was like somewhere else in the yard.
Okay.
It was a huge yard, and
I bet.
We're gonna show a picture of like a diagram of what the yards and things look like. So, although her pants and underwear had been pulled down, there was no sign of sexual assault, and tests determined there was no drugs or alcohol in her system.
So she's hit in the back of the head by surprise.
Mm-hmm.
Her skull is crushed, and then somebody tries to pull her underwear and pants down.
Yeah, apparently. Strange, right? The crime scene itself was huge. About 100 feet away from the pine tree, where, Martha's body was found, there was a 3 to 4 foot pool of coagulating blood. So that's where they believe
she was attacked.
She was attacked. And there was a section of the shaft of the golf club was also about 100 feet away. Another 20 feet away were the drag marks across the gravel driveway. Blood and some tissue were found, like along the drag marks, as on the other side of the asphalt were more pieces of the murder weapon, and more blood was found.
Why would her killer drag her?
I don't know.
What does it matter? Like, you're just dragging her under a tree, right?
I don't know. I guess maybe. I mean, she was hidden, kind of, right?
Kind of, but on her property.
On her own property, right? I don't know, because maybe there were just kids around the neighborhood, and maybe he was afraid. Okay. I have no idea. That's what I'm thinking.
It just seems weird.
Her death was approximated to be around 10 p.m. The Greenwich Police Department had little, if any, experience processing violent crimes. The police chief had been in the department for 30 years, and he hadn't been able to recall investigating even one murder before.
Wow.
They called in the Connecticut State Police for help, and the people of Belle Haven immediately began suspecting it was an outsider because, nobody in the neighborhood could have done this, right?
No way.
Yeah, I mean...
Rich people don't kill people.
Right. No one who met Martha, they figured, would want to kill her. She didn't have any enemies. She was a very nice girl. And like I said, Greenwich is an upscale town in Connecticut.
Very upscale.
The cost of living in this area is about 64% higher than the national average. So just to give you an idea. The draw to Greenwich tends to be because it's in close proximity to New York City, Manhattan. There's access to the ocean.
Well, I was going to say the ocean, right?
Yeah, the Atlantic Ocean is there. But it also has a small town feel, right? So that's, along the ocean and things, they call it the Gold Coast right there.
Oh.
Yeah.
Sounds lovely.
It does, doesn't it? Right.
You're right.
Right.
We've never been.
No, never been. I'm sure it's lovely.
Fort Lauderdale's what we can afford.
Exactly. When the Moxleys moved into their home just a year before Martha was murdered, They fit right in with the people there. David Moxley was a partner in charge of the New York office of the Big 8 accounting firm, which is now called Deloitte, but then it was called Touche Ross.
No, I have no idea.
I've heard of Deloitte. The neighborhood kids Martha had been hanging out with the night before, Helen Ix and Jackie Wittenhall, their fathers were president of Cadbury Schweppes, like the Cadbury eggs.
Oh,
and
wow.
Schweppes ginger ale is what I think of.
And club soda.
Yeah.
I have it in my car.
Yeah, right.
I have it in my car.
And the other father was the chairman of the American Dairy Association. Oh. So where everyone in Belle Haven was rich, Martha's next door neighbors, the Skakel family, they were obscenely rich, okay? The dad was Rushton Skakel, and he and his wife had 7 children. The Skakel family were owners of one of the largest privately held companies at the time, which was called Great Lakes Carbon. And Rushton's sister, Ethel, had married Bobby Kennedy.
Yes. In
1950.
So that's his sister that married. Okay. Mm-hmm. Ethel married
Bobby Kennedy. Robert Kennedy, right.
Robert Kennedy.
Rushton, unfortunately, was an abusive alcoholic and kind of an absent father. And his wife passed away in 1973. So he's got, all these children.
And when does the story take place?
In 1975. 75, right.
Okay.
So his kids are, he'd often have to go out of town for work, leaving his children, and some of them were adults. There was Rushton Jr., who was 19, Julie, who was 18, Thomas was 17, John was 16, Michael was 15, David was 12, and Stephen, the youngest, he was 9. So he would often leave the kids in the care of household help because he had to go out of town.
Right.
His 6 boys had a reputation of being wild and out of control. And Thomas and Michael had a huge sibling rivalry, and they were extremely competitive with one another. I mean, they're only a year apart.
Right. And they're teen boys.
Yeah, and they're teen boys. On the evening of October 30th, 1975, Martha was 15, like I mentioned. She left her house that night to go celebrate, they called it Mischief Night. I forgot.
Mischief Night.
Mischief Night, right.
That's a little softer than Devil's Night.
Yeah, she went out to celebrate Mischief Night, and they would go toilet paper houses, throw eggs at passing cars, and they'd play Ding Dong Ditch.
Ding Dong Ditch?
Yeah, when you ring the doorbell and you run away.
Oh, okay.
And other types of pranks.
I didn't know there was a name for what I did.
Yeah.
Back in the day.
Yeah.
Ding Dong Ditch.
This was not only the day before Halloween, but the first day of a 3-day weekend. So it was kind of,
party time.
Party time, right? On this night, security in the community was increased for the anticipated, youth activities.
The mischievousness.
Yes, the mischievousness.
Of the teens.
Martha and her friends walked around the area, going between houses, hanging out with one another, other friends, and ended up at some point during the evening, about 9:00 at the Skakel home.
Next door to her house, right?
Yes. The Skakel boys went to a private school called Brunswick, and Martha attended a local high school. She went to Greenwich High, so they didn't know each other very well. But she had recently met and began to get to know Thomas and Michael, who were both just a little bit older than her.
Age, yeah.
Yeah. And they were both romantically interested in her.
Oh, both were.
Yeah,
and
both
you said
were.
they were they had a
extremely
lot of
competitive,
rivalry.
Right? And she enjoyed the attention and had begun writing about it in her diary. And I do have a few pages from her diary that, you won't be able to really read it, but there are a few pages. She has really nice handwriting. I know it's a weird thing to say, but she does.
I have crappy handwriting. I
her
appreciate
handwriting
that.
is so nice.
I appreciate that.
That night, before she passed away, before she was murdered, she had been sitting in the front seat of the Skakel's Lincoln with Michael. Helen and Jeffrey Byrne, one of the other local teens, they were in the back seat. Neither Michael nor Martha had their driver's license, so they were just sitting in the driveway listening to music.
Like a parent's car or something?
I think so. Yeah. I'm thinking it was a parent's car. Someone's car. None of their car.
So Lincoln.
Yeah. Exactly. About 9:15, Thomas got out of the car saying he wanted to go get one of his cassette tapes, but instead he climbed into the front seat, sandwiching Martha between he and his brother. So that's a little weird, right? Both boys had more than a few beers in them. Thomas started flirting with Martha. He put his hand on her leg, to which she told him, "Get your hand off." And she probably smacked it.
And then his brother's on the other side of her?
Mm-hmm. And Michael's watching his older brother move in, on Martha, and he's trying to win her affection. Maybe 15 minutes later, Rushton Jr., who was 19, and John came out to the car and said they needed to use it. So maybe it was Rushton's car. I'm not sure. They wanted to go to their cousin's house to watch Monty Python. Michael wanted to go and asked Martha if she'd like to go and watch the movie with them. And I'm not sure exactly what Monty Python movie, but she declined, and she said she had to get home. And Thomas decided to stay behind also. Thomas and Martha walked off the driveway near the Skakel's shed, and they were flirting and kind of kissing a little bit.
Oh,
yeah.
Okay.
Helen and Jeff, who had stayed behind with their friend, began to be disgusted by Martha's behavior, and they decided to go home.
Why were they disgusted?
I don't know. I'm not sure, but they were. And as they walked away across the Skakel's backyard, they saw Thomas and Martha fall together behind the fence near the Skakel pool. That was the last time they would see her alive. Martha didn't have a real curfew. She was only expected to be home at a reasonable, quote-unquote, hour.
Reasonable. Yeah, I get it.
Yeah. It was her judgment as to what a reasonable hour should be. She's getting a little older. Her parents are trying to give her some freedom. The previous week, she had stayed out until 2 or 3 in the morning.
That's a little bit unreasonable.
Yeah, she was pushing her mom's patience with that. Around 9:30, when Martha and her friends were splintering to their homes, Dorothy Moxley was home painting around the windows of one of their bedrooms on the second story of their, basically, mansion. She heard a scuffle on the side of the house through the closed windows. Although she was used to hearing kids cutting through her property, this voice didn't sound too friendly or innocent, so she went and she turned the light on their back porch, looking to see if she could see anything. Around that time also, several dogs in the neighborhood started barking loudly.
Okay.
Enough, and for such a sustained amount of time, that many of the residents of Belle Haven noticed, and several neighbors were startled enough to go and check on, what's going on.
What's going on?
Yeah. Around 10 p.m., Dorothy decided to stop painting. She cleaned up, took a shower, got dressed for bed, and by 11, she was downstairs watching the news. John returned home from his friend's house around 11:20. Dorothy was getting annoyed at this point that Martha wasn't home yet. John was kind of secretly pleased that his perfect sister was getting in trouble, right?
That's nice.
They probably had that kind of relationship.
Nice.
And he told his mom, "I'll go look for Martha." He got in his truck and went driving around the neighborhood for about a half an hour. He came and reported back to his mom that he had only seen one drunk kid sleeping it off in a neighbor's yard, and there was no sign of Martha.
One drunk kid?
Mm-hmm. I'm thinking it's almost close to midnight now. So maybe they'd all gone home, and who knows, right?
I know, but I like the fact that he's just sleeping it off.
In somebody's yard.
In someone's yard.
I know.
What the hell?
I know. It's like, okay. I know he was like, whatever.
Okay.
Yeah. Dorothy fell asleep in front of the television, and she woke up after midnight. She first went and checked Martha's room to see if she was home, and seeing her daughter's bed was empty, she went downstairs and she started making phone calls. First, she called Helen Ick's house, where Helen told her that she had last saw Martha with Thomas Skakel. Helen gave Dorothy the phone number to the Skakel house, and she called there immediately. Julie answered the phone. Dorothy,
Who's Julie?
Julie's the sister.
Okay.
Dorothy asked her if anyone had seen Martha. So she went to ask her brothers what they knew. Julie went to go ask her brothers. When Julie got back to the phone, she told Dorothy that her brother Thomas had said he last saw Martha at the back door of his house around 9:30 when he went inside to work on a school project about Abraham Lincoln.
A mischievous night or whatever, mischief night.
And the beginning of a 3-day weekend.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know you, but I always waited until Sunday to get like shit done, right? I'm a procrastinator, so I would always wait to the last minute. I certainly wouldn't start it on a Thursday night, the day or whatever it was before.
Mischief night, devil's night. No, I'm going to be the one passed out drunk.
Yeah. Over the next few hours, Dorothy would call the Skakels' house back several times, expressing concern and asking for more details about Thomas's last interaction with Martha. He consistently said that he saw her at his back door around 9:30, and that's when he went inside to study.
What did he say? What is she doing at the back door?
Like, I think they were probably saying goodbye or goodnight.
Oh, okay.
At one point, on Dorothy's insistence, Julie woke up her brother so Dorothy could speak to him herself. Because she's not...
Thomas?
Yeah, Thomas. She simply asked him, do you know where Martha could be? And he replied, I have no idea where she is. Dorothy called neighbor after neighbor, waking them all up between the hours of midnight and 3 a.m. No one had seen Martha or had any clue for Dorothy as to where she might be. At 3:15, Dorothy woke John up, her son, and asked him to go once again searching for his sister. He's like, damn it. It's 3 o'clock in the morning. But he was really concerned now because he's like, Martha should be home.
Right.
So when he returned with no information about Martha, Dorothy called and reported her missing to the Greenwich Police Department, and it was about 3:48 a.m.
Where was he looking for her?
I'm thinking he drove around the neighborhood.
He didn't actually look in their yard.
I don't think he got out of his truck.
Okay.
That's what I'm kind of picturing.
Yeah.
Like, and I don't know how big the neighborhood is, but I picture like big homes with huge yards. Huge yards. And so he's looking around because he's probably thinking, like maybe she's passed out, like that drunk kid, and maybe that happened, or maybe she's sitting somewhere. Who knows, right? When the police arrived, Dorothy answered their questions and told them she had no reason to suspect that Martha had run away.
Yeah, that's just ridiculous.
Yeah, because that was a popular thing for the police to say about when teenagers went missing. She went in and helped the officers search the main house, as well as a small cottage that was behind the main house.
Oh, that's nice.
Yeah. Neither saw anything to hint at, what may have happened to Martha. I'm guessing they didn't come upon that pool of blood yet, or maybe it was too dark. Who knows? 2 Greenwich police cars drove around the neighborhood, shining lights around the homes, hoping to see her walking around the streets or in somebody's yard. And just after 6:30 a.m. on October 31st, an officer called Dorothy to see if there'd been any sign of Martha, like maybe she showed back up. Did she return
home?
Right. But Dorothy told him, nope, she's still not home.
Oh, I'd be freaking.
Oh, I would be too. I had a horrible dream last night that just reminded me that my daughter went missing. It was it was a nightmare. Like, I was terrified. We shouldn't be
doing all these true crime podcasts.
I know, we really shouldn't. But at some point in those early morning hours, Dorothy fell asleep in the window seat of the library of their mansion by the phone waiting for news. She woke up around 10 a.m. and she still saw no sign of Martha. She walked out the front door, down the driveway, and right to the Skakels' back sun porch, and she knocked on the door. Michael answered, looking pale, hungover, and exhausted.
Was he the passed out one?
I don't know if he was passed out. No, there probably was a lot of kids that got drunk. She asked him if he had seen Martha or if he knew where she could be. He said no. Looking around, Dorothy saw a camper on the property. Knowing Martha liked beer, she thought maybe her daughter had too much to drink and she passed out in the camper rather than either come home drunk or pass out in the yard, maybe. So after asking the gardener to unlock it, they checked to find there was no sign of her daughter there either. Disappointed, Dorothy went home to call her husband David to tell him, please come home because Martha's missing. And when her body was found and the reporters began to gather at his house, a friend also called David to and left him a message.
And what time was her body found again?
It was in the morning, so it's
late morning then.
Yeah, it was late morning. I don't think it was in the afternoon. So David called from the airport to let Dorothy know he's on his way home. The investigation into Martha's murder began just after noon on October 31st, 1975. The police first examined the murder weapon. They noted that a 6-iron golf club was the golf club. It was a rare Tony Penna model. I know nothing about golf.
I don't either.
So just go with it.
But it sounds expensive because it's rare.
Right. During the search, police found a set of Tony Penna clubs in the Skakel's garage that happened to be missing a 6-iron.
Oh, coincidence?
Right?
I think not.
When asked, they stated that those clubs had belonged to Rushton's late wife. Upon learning that, coupled with the fact that Thomas was the last known person to see Martha alive, it moved Thomas to the top of the suspect list.
Yeah.
And the police went and knocked on the Skakel's door. Julie, the second oldest of the children and the only daughter, answered the door. When asked, she told police that Ken Littleton, the live-in tutor, had
live-in tutor?
Live-in tutor.
Live-in tutor?
And a gardener and, gardener and what else?
How much tutoring can you do? I guess there's 7.
Yeah.
That could be a full-time job.
Yeah, there's 7 kids. That's true, right? But really,
Live-in. Wow.
So she told police that the tutor, Ken, he had taken Julie and her brothers to the Belle Haven Club for dinner, and they got home about 9. October 30th, in fact, was Ken's first night on his job with the Skakels. Ken was 23 years old and a recent Williams College graduate. He'd been hired by the Brunswick School, where the Skakel boys were attending.
Oh, yeah, the private school.
Yeah, and he taught science and coaching. Ken's employment at their school is more likely than not where Rushton met him, and his popularity with the students at the school is one of the reasons why he was hired for this in-house tutoring position. Rushton thought that having a man in the house when he was gone on long trips couldn't hurt either.
That's true.
An attempt to keep the kids in line. The police next interviewed Michael. He said that Martha, Helen, and Jeff had come to their house around 9:10. They listened to music in the car, and Thomas had come out to join them. He told them he had gone with his brother to his cousin's house at 9:30. That was to watch Monty Python, and he didn't return home until about 11:20. Believing the murder took place around 10 p.m., the police determined they weren't interested in Michael as a suspect.
He's gone.
Right.
And she was last seen with Thomas.
Right. But when Thomas arrived home on October 31st around 5:30 p.m., detectives were eager to talk to him. During his interview with police, Thomas told them he went to the car to get a cassette around 9:15, and after the group left to go to Thomas's cousin's house, he stood and spoke to Martha for a few minutes in his yard before going into the house to study. Around 9:30, he watched Martha walk out of the driveway toward her backyard. On November 3rd, so a few days later, detectives asked Rushton if Thomas would take a polygraph, and both the teen and his father agreed. After 3 tests, the results were inconclusive.
All 3?
All 3. The 17-year-old hadn't been sleeping and was obviously anxious about the polygraph.
Freaking out about being a murder suspect.
Right?
And he knew Martha, and she's dead. That's all got to affect
and it was a violent death.
Yeah, right by his house.
Yeah. On November 9th, they decided to try again, and this time he passed. Although he was clearly a suspect for the police, the people of Greenwich didn't agree, including the police chief, who stated that such things were, quote, irresponsible and groundless rumors, unquote. The Skakel family had cooperated with the police at every turn. The Greenwich detectives never had to file for a search warrant because Rushton allowed them to examine whatever they asked. And he had even given police keys to search his ski lodge without him being present.
Ski lodge?
And I'm not sure how far away the ski lodge is.
Ski lodge.
But
like a room in the ski lodge or the whole ski lodge?
The whole ski lodge, I'm guessing. It can't be that far because I mean, there's snow in Connecticut. I didn't
know you had your own ski lodge.
In New England, right? I don't know. November 4th, 1975. It was a Tuesday. That was the day of Martha's funeral. The First Lutheran Church was standing room only because over 500 people attended the service. When it was over, the people who attended it had to walk by cameras, photographers, reporters. I mean, it was just swarmed outside.
Was it a closed casket?
I don't know.
I bet it was.
I hope. I don't know.
Poor Martha.
I know. Poor Martha.
She's only 15.
I know. Detectives watched from the sidewalk, observing people as they exited the church, looking for clues and any behavior of the mourners. Dorothy was one of the last to leave, and she noticed Thomas Skakel sitting alone and looking sad. Michael was close by, talking to his friends and brothers. Like many others in the community, Belle Haven, she didn't believe that anyone in Belle Haven could have done this.
Could have done it, especially not some young boys.
Right, like she was convinced that it had to be an outsider. She approached Thomas and gave him a hug, and she didn't know at that point that he was a suspect.
Oh, she didn't even know that?
No, she didn't know that. By December 11th, 1975, the case had begun to go stale. Police began pulling people in to re-interview them, including Helen Ix and Jeffrey Byrne. At this point, Helen and Jeff told investigators about how they had seen Thomas and Martha flirting and kissing at the back door of the Skakel home around 9:30. The detectives developed a new theory as to what happened. This is what they thought.
Okay.
Thomas was making sexual advances at Martha, and she said no, leading Thomas to get so mad that he murdered her. Just 2 days later, Thomas reported to the detectives for another interview on his own, during which detectives took samples of his hair for testing, and Thomas agreed to this.
They had hair samples of...
Yeah. About a month later, detectives asked Rushton for permission to request Thomas's medical and school records, and the authorization was quickly received. Rushton gave it. A week later, after that, investigators received a phone call from the council of the Whitby School, another private school some of the Skakel children went to. And during this conversation regarding the records request, the lawyer seemed to get agitated, indicating to detectives that he believed an arrest was imminent.
So what is the school lawyer doing?
I don't know.
Like what?
I know, right? On January 22nd, 1975, Rushton appeared at the Greenwich Police Department with a letter for the chief of police rescinding his authorization for them requesting his son's records.
Well, what is the school records and medical records gonna?
What, he's a what is he, a troublemaker? Like what is, or I don't know if he is, but like, are they hoping to find that he's a troublemaker at school, or maybe threatening other students? I don't know. I can only think.
They could get that through testimony of teachers and things.
Right. 30 minutes later, an ambulance was dispatched to the Ix residence. Rushton had gotten pains, collapsed, and had to be taken to the hospital for treatment. When the detectives arrived at the hospital to talk to him, he informed them that he had hired a criminal attorney for his son, and he rescinded the records authorization for Thomas, and on the advice of their attorney, they would no longer be cooperating. Their lawyer would not only represent Thomas, but also the rest of the family and the household staff, the tutor, the maid, the cook, and the gardener.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
Well, I can see. I mean, I would hire, obviously, we're lawyers.
Yeah.
I'd hire a lawyer right away.
Yeah, I don't even think I would have talked to them.
Yeah.
I definitely would not have talked to them. Not I think.
Not without a lawyer.
Right, not without a lawyer. Emmanuel Manny Margolis, who was Rushton's counsel, refused to allow police to interview any of the Skakel family members, but permitted them to interview the help. Ken Littleton, the newly hired live-in tutor, became their focus then. Upon being continually interviewed by police in April 1976, he retained his own attorney in addition to the services of Rushton's lawyer. Littleton cooperated, participating in the interviews, but he refused to sign any statement indicating that circumstantial evidence pointed at Thomas.
Well, why would he?
I know.
Mean, so I think what you're saying is they were trying to lay out what happened that night, and he refused to sign it, right?
Right. He's like, I'm staying out of it.
Right.
Late in 1976, Ken Littleton was still being interviewed by police. So this is almost, a year later. And he had failed a polygraph when he lied about the fact that he had been arrested earlier that summer. The police decided to dig into what was going on with him, and they noticed that since the murder, he seemed to be on the path of self-destruction. He'd become a petty thief who was arrested and hospitalized several times for alcohol problems. The police practically forgot about Thomas, and they began to focus
on Ken.
Despite all the effort and work that was put into the investigation, the police couldn't find a link between Ken and the murder. It seemed that without the help and cooperation of the Skakels, they were just out of ideas now.
Weren't there fingerprints on the golf club?
You would think. I don't know. Around the same time, Rushton approached the Moxleys at their home. He was holding a drink in one hand and joked that he'd just returned home from an AA meeting. Haha.
Oh, that's funny.
Yeah. Rushton told the Moxleys that he wanted to set their minds at ease about Thomas. He disclosed that they had several tests done, and they all indicated that Thomas was innocent of their daughter's murder. And I'm thinking maybe these are the polygraphs.
But they were inconclusive. Only one.
Only one he passed. David Moxley inquired as to whether the police had been informed about the tests that he was speaking about. And Rushton said, well, on the advice of my lawyer, they do not. So they don't know about these tests. So it couldn't have been the polygraphs, right? I don't know what other tests there could possibly be.
They could have done private polygraphs.
Yeah, that's true. When the Moxleys told the police, the Skakel lawyer handed over the tests. So they found out about it and they got the tests. Once the Moxleys' attorney had time to examine them, the Moxleys and their lawyer and the police came out and said that it seemed the tests were satisfactory, that they satisfactorily
were done.
Approved.
They were done satisfactorily.
Thomas's innocence. Okay. Satisfactorily.
So just stop.
I'm saying it wrong.
To their satisfaction.
Yes, thank you. The investigation was again at an impasse. Over the next few years, little movement was made on the case, unfortunately. Greenwich PD reached out to the Detroit Police Department. At the time, Detroit was the murder capital of America.
We're not trying to brag here.
Yeah, I'm not trying to brag.
But we are from the suburbs of Detroit.
Yeah. And their detectives were considered among the best in the country. I mean, in the murder capital of the world, or America, I mean, you're working on a lot of murders, right?
It's still like number 2 or 3.
Yeah.
And Flint's like number 1.
I know.
And we're right in between the two.
That's nice. 2 of their detectives went to Greenwich to assist in the investigation. Detectives from Nassau County in New York also flew to Connecticut to help. And although this assistance, they had this assistance of more experienced detectives who could give new insight into the investigation, nothing came of it. In 1988, David Moxley, who's Martha's dad, he died of a heart attack.
Mm-hmm.
He had been very active in the investigation, and now it was left to Dorothy to take up the reins. Dorothy felt overwhelmed. Her husband was a successful businessman with connections all over the place, and she had been a homemaker. She began talking.
And she lost her daughter, and now she's lost her husband.
Right.
And
she talked to anyone who would listen about the case, and she ended up meeting with journalist Len Levitt. He attempted to do research and realized there was very little in the way of public records about the Martha Moxley investigation. The news publication, which is called the Greenwich Time, and Len Levitt sued the police department for the release of the police records. Eventually, there were heavily redacted records that were released.
I've had them. You get like one line.
Yeah, exactly.
There's no information.
But that was only the first part of this battle. Once he had written a story about Martha's murder and investigation, he couldn't find a single Connecticut newspaper to run it.
What?
I know, right?
You think they'd be all over that?
Mm-hmm. Right, you'd think. In spring 1991, a man named William Kennedy Smith was arrested and charged with rape in Palm Beach, Florida. I don't know if you remember that one. I remember that one.
A little bit.
The reporters on that case began searching for related stories, and they came across the Martha Moxley murder and the connection between Rushton Skakel and the Kennedy family. When the connection was made, rumors started circulating, calling it another Kennedy cover-up.
Yeah, well,
and speculation
there are
began.
a couple out there.
Yeah, that maybe William had been at the Skakel house on the night of Martha's murder. William Kennedy Smith.
Wasn't he a very handsome guy?
Yeah, I think he was. Yeah,
I feel like I kind of
that.
remember, but I could be wrong.
Because of this publicity, in June 1991, both Greenwich Time, that newspaper, and the Stamford Advocate ran Len Levitt's story finally. It was the first time there had been a comprehensive news account of the murder and investigation released to the public, and authorities were all but forced to reopen her case.
All that pressure.
Yeah, all that pressure, right? It's now out in the open and people are wondering. A press conference was held on August 9th, 1991, and officials announced the formal re-investigation of the Moxley case, and Dorothy and John were in attendance to announce a $50,000 reward and the funding of a toll-free tip line. For the next few years, the renewed interest in the investigation led to movies being made.
Yes, this is where I remember hearing
Books
about
were
it.
written.
It was a big deal.
Yeah, it was a big deal. And news programs running specials related to the investigation. I'm thinking like 2020 and
Dateline.
Yeah, and news programs like that. By January 21st, 1994, after all the forensic examination and thorough review of the evidence, the analysis, and the accompanying 6-inch thick report, even though all this happened, it seemed it didn't go anywhere. By October of that same year, the Greenwich PD had practically given up, and the chief was forced to admit that no arrests were expected.
This is what's confusing, is it's the Skakel's golf club.
I know.
How did someone get the Skakel's 6-iron?
I know. I have a huge problem with that part of the story.
Was the garage open? And
do you just leave your garage open? I guess if you're in a rich neighborhood,
and
you do.
And if you're like a crazy killer in a neighborhood you don't belong in and you want to kill somebody, you're just going to go
you just happen, to look for something.
In a garage?
This all had to have happened like within a half an hour, 45 minutes. So, yeah, it just happened to be an outsider, right?
Yeah. Wanting to kill and goes in someone's garage and steals a golf club.
Yeah, I have a huge problem with the golf club.
Right.
When the official investigation was announced, the Skakel family hired Sutton Associates, which was a PI firm, to do their own investigation. Sutton Associates was a firm that included former law enforcement officers, including a 15-year veteran of the FBI. The mandate from Rushton was investigate the Martha Moxley murder from the beginning and see if the evidence pointed to anyone outside of the Skakel family. He said, quote, "If my kids didn't do it, I want my family's name cleared.
Cleared, right.
If they did do it, I want to prepare the best possible defense," end quote. The investigation took years and cost upward of $1 million. The Sutton team discovered the evidence against the Skakel boys, that it was even more damaging than had been previously thought, and the new information would only cause more suspicion.
What do you do if you're the dad?
I know.
And the evidence comes back
that your kids could have been involved? I know, it's a hard one.
Tough.
The story Thomas gave to the police regarding the night of the murder was that, remember,
he was studying
Yeah,
afterwards.
he saw Martha at the back door of his home around 9:30, and then he went inside to work on this assignment about Abraham Lincoln.
Right.
The story was already suspicious because Thomas had been drunk and likely also high, but also just from general knowledge, he wasn't a very good student.
And it's hard to do a good job when you're drunk and high.
And like I said,
I've been to college.
It was the beginning of a 3-day weekend. In addition to all those factors, neither his teachers at his school nor Ken Littleton, the live-in tutor, had given such an assignment.
Oh, what?
He's doing it for shits and giggles, I guess.
You're just making that up?
Right?
He could have made up something else.
He could have.
Why make up something like that?
That's totally non-existent?
Yeah.
The story Thomas told during the Sutton interviews, so this is now years and years later, was that instead of going inside to do homework, he and Martha kissed and mutually masturbated each other to orgasm.
Oh.
In an encounter in the Skakel backyard. that lasted about 20 minutes.
Is that when they were by the pool? Because you were saying
Yeah, I'm not sure if they were by the pool, but they were on the grounds, and it was from like 9:30 to 9:50, putting him with Martha right around the time she believed to have been killed.
Right.
Michael also changed his story. He continued to claim that he had been at his cousin's house, returning home about 11:30. But after returning home, he said that he walked around peeping in windows until he came to the Moxley home.
Peeping in windows?
Yeah, where he climbed a tree and began throwing pebbles at the window he believed belonged to Martha's bedroom. When Martha didn't come to the window, he climbed down from the tree and went to the side yard. The attack had occurred in the side yard. By the time he said he got home, he'd been outside from 11:40 to 12:30 a.m. When Len Levitt heard about the change in their stories, he took it to his newspaper. When Sutton Associates took the revelations to the Skakel family, they told the firm not to complete the investigation or the report.
We're done now.
Yeah, we're done now. The case stalled for years. In 1998, the book Murder in Greenwich was written by author Mark Furman.
Mark Furman from the OJ trials. It was published. The book pointed out numerous mistakes, oversights, and flat-out lies, stating from when the first police officers arrived at the Moxleys until after Sheila found Martha's body. I think when his book came out, it really kicked off a lot more publicity than was already out there.
Right?
Because I remember that book.
Yeah. I mean, yeah, you remember it because it was Mark Furman, right?
True.
Yeah.
That's probably true.
In the book, it stated that Officer Jones went inside to use the phone to contact the department to avoid the media from hearing about the violent death. It said also that Officer Hickman was left to ensure no evidence was lost. In interviews in 1997, both Hickman and Jones said that's not what happened. After Jones had left to use the phone, Hickman, in a panic, ran to the car to make calls over the radio for more officers and a medical examiner, which explains why John arrived home, that when he arrived home after football practice, he couldn't even make it up the driveway because there was just tons of, personnel there. When Jones returned to the body from calling the department, Hickman was standing next to Martha's body petting a dog who was licking up the trail of blood.
What?
In the leaves and grass.
What the fuck is that?
Literally eating evidence. It's understood that before a body is moved, as much evidence as possible should be collected.
Yeah, of course.
And recorded. Pictures, notes, measurements, right? All this should be done.
Yeah, of course.
Between the time Martha's body was discovered and 2 p.m., at least 12 people had touched the remains.
And a dog.
And she'd been moved a minimum of 3 times.
Why?
Who knows? I mean, they have no experience.
Right, that's true.
Right?
But even I know
not to touch anything.
I'm not a trained professional.
Right? I know I'm not a trained professional, but damn. The number of police that had arrived at the Moxley property when her body was found was noted by John when he pulled up to the house that afternoon. He said it would have been a great day to be out robbing houses because all the police were basically at his house.
But that's a good thing, though.
Yeah, it is a good thing.
Many people
right.
helping.
But everybody was there, and they were just fucking up the crime scene. Afterward, it was noticed that all the police were mulling around in the driveway where the initial attack seemed to have taken place. The civilians that had shown up when the excitement started were trampling all over the trail of blood, where it was discovered the killer had dragged her body from the driveway to under the pine tree. When a perimeter was finally established, the Greenwich police attempted to line it out with manila folders because they did not have any crime scene tape.
I don't know what to say.
Yeah. The detectives that had arrived at the Moxleys, instead of investigating the crime scene and gathering evidence on arrival, went to canvass the neighborhood as the evidence was deteriorating or even being blown away in the wind. The Greenwich police had requested help from the Connecticut State Police Mobile Crime Lab, and they arrived at nearly 5 p.m., making it nearly dark because it's fall, and it gets dark early. When the van pulled up to the Moxley house, they drove almost on top of the site of the original attack. After they arrived, within a half an hour, Martha's body was removed from the scene.
Oh, she'd been laying out there for like 20 hours.
Yeah.
Almost.
Greenwich PD had requested the state medical examiner to come and remove the body, but when there wasn't any response from the office, Martha's body was picked up by a local funeral home, and the mobile crime lab had completed whatever they had done by 5:30 p.m. No medical examiner had observed the rigor mortis of Martha's body or the lividity, so it was unclear how the police determined Martha's time of death.
What time she died, yeah.
During the review of the autopsy, it had been found that Martha had blood in her lungs, indicating that when the killer stabbed her through the neck, she had still been alive and breathing. There had been a wound on the left side of her head that looked like the shaft of a golf club. The police had long assumed the incident in the side of her head was the first strike of the attack. But when the medical examiner had the chance to review the autopsy, they said that it wasn't a wound. There was no bruising, no fracture to the skull in that area. The review determined that Martha had died while lying on the shaft of the golf club for around 30 minutes.
So it pressed on her head?
Yeah.
Like it made an indentation?
Yeah.
So she didn't, I thought her skull was crushed.
Yeah, it was. But she's bleeding out, you know. She was hit in the head, but they're saying that this was like the first blow.
Oh, okay. Gotcha.
And it made an indent in her skin and no other wound. When Martha was found, she was face down under the tree, not lying on her left side on a golf club, though.
Has she been moved?
Who knows, right? Or is this all bullshit? I don't know. There became little doubt that the killer had bludgeoned her.
Knew she didn't moved, yeah.
Right.
Okay.
Left her for dead and returned later to hide the body. I don't know how they determined that, but, right? When he returned and Martha was still alive, he then stabbed her in the neck with the golf club to kill her. Additionally, on examination of the report of her stomach contents, an unrelated medical examiner was able to estimate that the time of Martha's death was between 9:30 p.m. and 1:30 a.m.
Oh, that's
a huge window.
That's 4 hours.
Yeah. In June 1998, Judge Jor N. Thim was appointed as a one-man grand jury, which was a rare practice. And it's something that a prosecutor can request when other investigative procedures have failed. Between 1985 and 1997, there had only been 7 grand jury investigations in all of Connecticut. Judge Thim spent a year and a half reviewing the evidence, interviewing witnesses, and studying transcripts. In September 1998, it was reported that the director of a school for troubled youth where Michael had attended as a teenager in 1978 was refusing to testify before the judge. Joseph Ritchie opened Elan School in 1970 to serve primarily as a drug rehabilitation center. The school used a controversial method of treatment based on the Synanon philosophy, using confrontation and attack therapy.
What?
Yeah, it used like shouting and humiliation as tools that were supposed to force the person to face their problems. In 1978, Michael had been arrested for drunk driving and rushed and sent his son away wearing the handcuffs he'd been arrested in. At the time, the tuition for the Elan School treatment program was around $30,000 a year.
Sounds horrible.
I know. And during his stay at Elan, students would testify at Michael's trial that they had seen him thrown into a boxing ring and watched him beaten by fellow students.
The hell?
To get him to confess.
Oh, to get him to confess?
Yeah. It was stated by another student that he was forced to wear a sign that read, "Confront me about the murder of Martha Moxley."
What the fuck is this, Tanya?
I know, for several weeks. And he was the subject of a general meeting where over 100 students would shout in his face, yelling at him to confess.
So do you think his dad thought he did it? Because why would he allow this to all happen?
I don't know. Before Joseph would have even been able to testify, he died of lung cancer, the head of the school. And Elan School closed in 2011 after the publicity surrounding their therapy practices led to a very sudden drop in enrollment.
Yeah, that's horrible.
Yeah. The grand jury convened after deciding there was enough evidence to charge Michael Skakel in January 2000 with the murder of Martha Moxley.
Not Thomas.
Yeah, not Thomas, Michael. And he surrendered himself to authorities later that day before being released shortly on a $500,000 bail. In March that year, he was arraigned in juvenile court due to the fact that he was 15 at the time of the murder.
That's right. I remember that.
Yeah. By the end of January 2001, a judge ruled that he should be tried as an adult. The trial began in May 2002 and lasted 3.5 weeks.
And he's gross.
Yeah.
He's gross.
On May 9th, the prosecutor called witness Andrea Renna to the stand. Michael's alibi had always been that he'd gone to his cousin's, right, to watch the movie.
Monty Python.
Yeah. And on the stand, Andrea said she'd been at the Skakel house that night of the murder, and she was positive that she had seen Michael still home after Rushton Jr. and John had left to watch the movie. On May 17th, 2002, a former classmate of Michael's from a law school named John Higgins testified that when they were students, that Michael had confessed one night crying while thinking back on what seemed to be a foggy memory. Higgins also said that Michael had boasted during their stay in rehab, quote, "I'm going to get away with murder. I'm Kennedy," end quote. Other witnesses called to the stand that had been at the school with Michael said sometimes he became angry and at other times he cried and said he didn't know if he killed her. On June 7th, 2002, the New York Times reported, quote, "A jury convicted Michael C. Skakel today of murder in the 1975 bludgeoning death of Martha Moxley." And they said after today's verdict, after a 3.5-week trial in which there was no direct physical evidence, it brought a conclusion to the nearly 27-year saga of the Moxley killing. And it was one of the most sensational murder mysteries in the Northeast.
Don't they think that he got upset because she rejected him or something?
Maybe. That could be a possibility.
That's what I thought.
Maybe, not remembering it. I mean, I don't know. The jury reached a verdict shortly after starting their 4th day of deliberations. On October 30th, Skakel was given 20 years to life. November 24th, 2003, an appeal on the murder conviction was filed. One of the grounds was the defense attorneys were challenging was whether the prosecution inflamed the jury by referring to Michael as, quote, "a spoiled brat," end quote. In January 2006, the appeal court, they rejected the filing.
That's just ridiculous.
However, in October 2013, a Connecticut superior judge granted Michael a new trial, stating that the defense attorneys in 2002 had provided ineffective counsel.
Oh, really?
And he was allowed freed on bail.
What?
After over a decade in prison.
You know how ineffective they have to be to actually get that in an appeal?
Right? In 2016, his conviction was reinstated and he was returned to prison by May 30th. But on May 4th, 2018, the Connecticut Supreme Court decided to review its 2016 decision on request of the defense, and they reversed the decision, vacating the murder conviction.
What?
Yeah.
I didn't know that.
So January 2019, after several attempts by the prosecution to revive the conviction, the U.S. Supreme Court denied their efforts, and Michael walked free. Ironically, on October 30th, 2020, the 45th anniversary of Martha's murder. And so he's out free. And I don't know who did
was
it.
He exonerated or what?
His conviction was overturned.
That means...
So is that exoneration? I guess, right? Not really.
No, that's not exoneration.
No, but it was overturned and
wasn't acquitted. It's just like they didn't press charges against him.
Yeah, and I think because it was like a new trial maybe, and then the prosecution decided not to pursue it.
Yeah.
Maybe, and that's why.
Because he already served a lot of time. And...
Yeah, so I don't know what to think in this case. I don't think it was an outsider.
Yeah, no, I think it was him.
Him or his brother, or both of them.
I think it was him.
I don't know. So
but I'm just alleged. I don't know.
Yeah,
I wasn't there, but... I
mean, he did get convicted, but he had ineffective counsel, apparently. So his lawyers did a real shit job.
I just can't imagine him having lawyers that did a shit job.
I know, because they had to be expensive lawyers,
Expensive
right?
lawyers.
And I don't know. Lazy lawyers? I don't know. I have no idea what to think.
Some minor technicality.
Mm-hmm. But I'd love to hear everybody's thoughts.
Well, thank you.
You're welcome. And thank you, everyone, for listening or watching. Before we go, I would just like to remind again, everyone to hit like, subscribe, follow, whatever. You know the drill. If you would like other episodes like this that are not released to the public, we have a Patreon account. It's Patreon, REON.com/TNT Crimes. You can sign up there, and we release one new episode a week that is not released to the public. And when we release these public episodes, you get them early and ad-free. You can also subscribe on the Apple Podcast app. You get the same episodes that are found on Patreon. We
Your
have
t-shirt?
merchandise like this t-shirt. This is my favorite one.
I'm dead inside.
I'm dead inside. That's on our website, crimesandconsequences.com, along with other merchandise, other t-shirts. There's one that says don't kill each other. So
Don't kill each other.
if you would like to support us that way, you may. And I think that's everything.
Yeah.
Thank you for watching,
And
listening.
our hearts go out
I
to the
know.
Moxley family.
You know, because what a terrible thing. I mean,
He's just so young.
I know. Just seems, was justice really served? I don't know.
No.
So until our next episode,
Don't kill each other.
bye.
Bye.